Hello, everyone. Welcome to Grant Writing, Creating a Grant Proposal. I want to take a moment just to thank everyone for attending our session on grant writing. We hope to provide you with important information that will assist you as you set out to draft a grant proposal for submission to potential funders. There are several sources of funding that are available for those who wish to gain support to address a specific topic of interest. These sources include various types of agencies, including for-profit, nonprofit, and government organizations. In order to secure funding from these and other types of organizations, it is critical that individuals learn the importance of understanding all aspects of the grant process. Learning about the core components of grant proposals and how to draft these components, individuals who wish to obtain funding can demystify the grant process and have a greater likelihood of securing funding. By the end of today's session, participants will list the steps involved in the grant writing process, identify components of a grant proposal, draft objectives for a potential grant proposal, and recognize common pitfalls in the grant writing process. So we're going to talk about organizing your proposal. But before you get to the stage, before you begin the grant writing process, it's essential that you do a little research to determine what topics you would like to tackle. You want to make certain that as you set out to seek funding for a grant, that the problem or topic that the grant will address is one that is important. You also want to formulate a study question that is relevant. You want the results of your work to have a positive and measurable effect on your community or the target audience. As you set out to write your grant proposal, try to think about what it is that you hope to achieve. You will need to specify a set of goals or objectives. It is helpful as you start this process of drafting your goals and drafting your objectives to think about a series of W questions. What are you trying to accomplish? What is the focus of your project? Who will participate in this process? When will this project occur? The responses to these and other W questions, as I call them, will be helpful because they can assist you as you try to determine what your set of proposal objectives will be and what your goal will be. As you organize your writing, plan to break the actual proposal up into segments. This is especially important if more than one individual is writing your grant proposal. Use section headings, subsection headings, and if necessary, subheadings. This will help you to more easily organize your material. So let's first take a look at the title page. Each funder may have a different requirement for each of the sections that are included in a proposal, but the title page typically includes the same type of information. It includes a clear yet concise title for your research project. So a good title is usually a compromise. It's important for it to be explicit, but you also want it to be concise. This page may also feature other information, including the names of any principal investigators on the proposed project, as well as those individuals, their institutional affiliations, including department and university names. The title page may also include additional information, including the dates of the proposed project, and if requested, the signatures of any organizational or university personnel who may need to authorize the proposal. These are just a few items that may be included on the title page. You want to be certain to review information about the specific requirements for the title and other sections of the grant proposal because they may differ for each funder. It's important that you follow all of these requirements. Most funders will specify the format of the title page, and some may even provide special forms to summarize basic administrative and fiscal data for the project. Now let's take a look at the abstract. Although the abstract is a short segment that is included within the proposal, it is an incredibly important part of the grant proposal. It's important because it offers readers the first and often most important impression of your project. Readers may review the abstract and then move on to other sections of the proposal. If a funder needs to remind him or herself about the various elements of your proposal, the abstract provides an opportunity to quickly glance through this section. If a funder wants to go back to the document to make a final recommendation, or if he or she needs to just quickly review your proposal, the abstract may also serve as the latest impression that the individual will have. The grant's abstract is a concise summary of the project, and it usually tends to appear at the front of the grant application. The abstract is an important part of the funding application, and it should actually describe the major aspects of your proposal. It tends to briefly summarize the proposal. It's usually less than 1 page. It includes statements of the problem or goal, the objectives, and the methods. The abstract should be clear and simple. And most importantly, the tip that you should keep in mind is it's the first thing the reviewer reads, but it should be the last item that's written. You draft the abstract after you've written the remainder of the proposal. As you draft the description of your project or your project narrative, keep in mind that most reviewers will consider this section to be the heart of the content of your proposal. For many, this section will provide the most important information that you will offer. You can use the project narrative section to establish that there is a clear need for your project, as well as discuss any benefits that may result. As you determine what your objectives will be, remember to be realistic. Decide which goals are actually feasible. Set goals and objectives that can be measured. As you decide what your plan of action will be, it may be helpful to clearly describe how you will evaluate the success of your activities or any data that you are able to collect. For instance, it may be helpful to members of a community to provide breast cancer education, but how will you know if the education is actually able to have an impact? And then how will you know if this impact will be able to lead to positive health outcomes for community members? You can determine this by devising an effective evaluation strategy. You should also use the project narrative section as a means of demonstrating the connection between the objectives that you have set and the methods that you will actually use. Providing this information will help demonstrate to any reviewers that you have given close consideration to your plan. The first sections of the project narrative focus on the introduction, the literature review, and background and significance. The introduction section provides information about the proposed project. The background and significance, or the need for the project, helps you to address why the work that you have proposed to do is so important. You can utilize this section to not only explain why your work is so important, but you can convey to potential funders what relevant work already exists and try to identify how your proposed work could address any gaps in knowledge. If you believe that your work could help to advance the field of research, be sure to convey this information. This section provides you with the opportunity to clearly convey what your proposed research or project is, what work has already been conducted in the field, and how your work can add to existing research, including how it can help fill in any existing gaps in the data. As you attempt to provide information about previous research that has been conducted, it will be important for you to provide a literature review. Although the requirements for proposals tend to differ based on the funder, many funders will require that you include a literature review in your proposal. The literature review can serve an important purpose. The literature review is basically a discussion of published information that focuses on the topic of interest. It can focus on a specific topic broadly, or it may only be necessary to narrow your focus and provide more recently published information about a topic within a specific duration of time. It provides funders with important background information about the topic of interest, and it can also serve as an opportunity to reveal to funders that the work that you may have already performed or any type of preliminary research that is related to the current proposed project. Although you may be tempted to include information about as much research as possible, it is not always necessary that you have a review that's exhaustive. Use care and be critical. Only include information about the research that is most relevant. Select the most pertinent literature and focus on including that. You can use this section to simply summarize and restate available existing information. You may also take a different approach by synthesizing information. While the summary works to recap, a synthesis of information provides the opportunity to try to reorganize information. You may wish to show how perspectives about a certain topic have changed over time. In this case, you may wish to select older sources. It may also be more important for you to kind of stick to the most current research and not include literature from sources that were published years ago. However you decide to proceed, you should always be certain to select the most pertinent literature sources to present, those that will help to support the assertion that your proposed work will be both needed and valuable. Let's now switch gears and look at goals, objectives, and outcomes. Next in the project narrative is the section that features goals, objectives, and outcomes. This section is of particular importance because it provides you with an opportunity to begin to tell the reviewer just what the vision for your project is, what you hope to accomplish, and how you hope to achieve this. For goals, what is the purpose of the project? What is the problem that you would like to address? What is your community's needs? Objectives, what will you do to accomplish this goal? Activities, what activities will be conducted in order to help achieve a specific objective? Output, what are the products of these activities? Outcome, how will you assess what has been achieved? Can you assess changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, practices, or other factors? Before you start to draft the project narrative section of your proposal, take some time to consider what goals you hope to achieve with your project's implementation and what the anticipated outcomes will be. Set clear goals and objectives so that you're able to convincingly convey to your readers what the purpose of your project will be. Why have you decided to undertake this project? Why is it important? As you sit down to try and draft the goals of your project, answer the questions: what is the purpose of my project? What is the problem that you would like to address? What is your community's need? Think of the goals as a result or expected purpose from the project. When you establish goals, you want to make sure to try and delineate what accomplishments you anticipate over the duration of the project. These goals should be clear and they should relate back to the problem statement that you have established at the outset, the vision that you have for your project. You set your goals and you achieve these goals through objectives and activities. After you decide which goals are actually feasible, you may then need to also distinguish which of those should be regarded as short, mid, or long-term goals. Remember, specify the result or expected purpose, state your goals clearly, relate the goals to the problem statement, and achieve goals through the objectives and activities that are set. When drafting objectives, think broadly about what you are trying to do. What are you trying to accomplish? Objectives should be able to relate to the activities that you include in the evaluation and methodology sections of the grant. An effectively drafted objective should have the ability to link to the goal statements of the proposal. As well, it should be written utilizing terms of measurement while also specifying a range of time and a target audience that will be impacted. Effective objectives have the ability to contain answers to questions like who, what, where, when, and how much. What are you trying to accomplish? How much change would you like to achieve? And can you describe this change with a measurable amount? What is the target population? What is the time frame that you have set to achieve this? Keep in mind that objectives should be drafted for each goal and they should be specific and tangible. For instance, you should be able to check off objectives as you accomplish them. For example, interviewing 100 people. Objectives can be categorized into 3 categories. You can have short, middle, and long-term objectives. When you draft your objectives, write using an active voice. Use action verbs, for example, plan, write, measure. When you draft your objectives, try to make certain that they follow the SMART objective criteria. SMART is an acronym that can be used to describe objectives that are tangible and actionable. That is, you want your objectives to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. For some individuals, the acronym SMART can be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, and others may also use the criteria audience or issue directed for the letter A, or realistic and ambitious for the letter R. Specific answers the question, what action or what change should occur in order to achieve the outcome? What exactly are we going to do for whom? What population will you serve? What actions will you utilize? Specific refers to objectives that are clearly identified and well-defined. What action or what change should occur in order to achieve the outcome? Select verbs that will help you describe this desired change, and you can use action words when writing objectives because objectives should be observable and measurable. So it helps if you can use words like define, discuss, translate, or perhaps compare, design, examine, or formulate. With regard to measurable, you want to answer the question, is it quantifiable and can we measure it? Can you count the results? Measurable indicates those objectives that are able to be measured in a way to demonstrate some level or impact of success. How can you measure changes? You can use values like numbers or percentages to describe changes. For example, instead of writing the objective, you want to improve the health outcomes of people in the United States, You could satisfy the measurable criterion by changing the objective to you want to decrease the cases of HIV/AIDS in individuals in the United States by 25% by the year 2020. That shows, or that's an example of how you can make a generic or more general objective satisfy the measurable criterion. You also want to ensure that your objectives are attainable or achievable, relevant, and time-bound. With regard to achievable and attainable, this aspect of an objective answers the questions, are we able to achieve this action in the project's designated timeline? Will you be able to accomplish your objectives in a specified period of time? Objectives should be within reach for your team or program, considering available resources and time. Objectives that are feasible, and objectives should be able to be accomplished. The project should have realistic expectations that objectives can be attained, considering any existing constraints. Objectives should also be realistic given the resources that are available. Now consider these questions as you try to set the project objectives. How can this objective be accomplished? Given the available time frame that has been set, can this objective be achieved? Should the project be scaled up or should it be scaled down based on the resources that you have? What resources will help us achieve this objective? Do you have access to any of the resources that you need? And what limitations or constraints might stand in your way or prevent you from achieving your objectives? If the objective actually satisfies the audience or issue directed criterion, if you're able to determine who the audience is, you want to use the name of the audience when describing whatever the objective or issue is. With regard to the criterion for realistic and ambitious or relevant, for relevant, will this objective have an effect on the desired goal or strategy? Are the methods used relevant for the objective that you're trying to accomplish? Make certain that there is a clear relationship between the two. Objectives should be certain to try to align with the project's overarching goals. The objective should relate in some way to the vision of the project. Additionally, relevance is important in another way. If an objective is relevant and it's important to your organization's actual mission, it will be supported by the leadership of your organization, and you may receive a greater level of buy-in from staff members whose efforts will be essential as you try to successfully complete your project. Is the objective relevant for the project that you are trying to complete? Make certain that there's a clear relationship between the objectives that you're setting and the overarching goal for your project. For example, if you have an objective where you are measuring the height of teens, this might not be important. If the goal of the project, is measuring the height of teens, it might not be important for you to set a program objective that seeks to assess any changes in mental health services that are offered to those teens. There is no relationship between the two. Now, as we switch gears a little bit and look at realistic and ambitious, for those who use that as a way to describe the R in SMART objective, like the time-bound criterion, realistic and ambitious answers the questions, what true changes can be expected about an issue in the proposed time frame? The last here is time-bound, that represents the T in SMART objective. When will this objective be accomplished, and or when will we know we are done? Based on what is currently known, when is the change expected? Objectives should be able to be achieved within a designated period of time. You should keep in mind the selected time frame. It should be optimal. It shouldn't be too short, because that may make completion or successful completion rather not really feasible, and it shouldn't be too long, and that may lead to procrastination and an inability to satisfy all of the needs of the project. List the target date for objectives and for the project's end, and then try to stick within these boundaries that you've set. So let's try to look at a situation where we want to create an objective and then make sure that that objective satisfies the SMART criteria. So the situation is the outreach staff at a facility communicate research findings to stakeholders. They have a difficult time understanding the research well enough to communicate the findings. A workshop is going to be conducted for this outreach staff to teach them how to understand findings and how to interpret findings. The desired outcome for this project will be the outreach staff will be able to understand and interpret research findings. How can we write objectives that follow the SMART format that satisfy the situation? So let's look at an example of how you might create a SMART objective. So the example here is the original objective is The outreach staff will be able to understand and interpret research findings. The SMART objective is by the end of August, 75% of the staff members that participate in the workshop will be able to describe and translate research findings. An objective for one grant proposal indicated that the focus of a project was to have outreach staff be able to understand and interpret research findings. While the idea and vision behind this objective is clear, the organization wants staff to understand findings, the objective could be much more specific. By using the SMART objective format, you can better convey what needs to be accomplished. So for this example, we answer the question when. The writer wants this objective to be fulfilled by the end of August. Who? The goal is not necessarily all of the staff, but just 75% of the staff. Who? The goal is also to increase the understanding of those staff who participate in the workshops specifically. And what? The writer wants workshop participants to be able to describe and translate research findings. So how do we modify the original objective so that it satisfied the SMART criteria? We made it specific by using action words, words like describe and translate and interpret. We made it measurable by deciding that we wanted 75% of the outreach staff to be impacted. We made it audience directed by selecting a target population, that is, the outreach staff. We made it realistic and ambitious by stating that what we hoped to accomplish was feasible. It's plausible that after attending 3 training sessions, an estimated 75% of staff would then be able to correctly interpret results or translate results. We made it time-bound by stating a target month of August. That's the time period that represents the end of the training sessions. So you have established your goals and objectives. As you consider the anticipated outcomes, determine how you will assess what has been achieved at the end of your project. Outcomes are the results or changes related to a project or program's intervention that will be experienced by the target audience. A project outcome can come in many forms. It is to be considered as the result of an activity. Outcomes are usually presented in the form of some type of measurable change. Examples of outcomes of a project may include increases in knowledge levels about a topic, changes in attitudes, beliefs, and practices, or some conditions. For example, you may want to implement a cancer education program, but how can you demonstrate the outcomes of this effort? How can you assess any changes in knowledge, attitudes, beliefs, or practices that those who attend the program may experience? In order to determine if and how much change has occurred, you must also consider how you will measure this change. While the proposal outlines in more general terms what the project is about and how long it will take to complete, the action plan or methodology section spells out in specific steps and procedures how the project will take place. The methodology section of your proposal provides you with an important opportunity to clearly outline and describe how you plan to utilize any requested funds to achieve the proposed objectives. This section helps you to provide the funder with the opportunity to make a clear connection between the objectives and goals that you have set and the outcomes that you hope to achieve. A well-written methodology section will help funders to more clearly picture how you will be able to accomplish objectives that have been set forth in the proposal. By demonstrating your capacity to be able to effectively achieve results, as well as your capacity to obtain any desired outcomes, you will have a greater likelihood of securing the funding that you require. As you work to complete your proposal, you should make certain that you take the steps necessary to make your application as competitive as possible. Clearly stated objectives and goals are important, and a clear description of the methodology that you will utilize is also essential. The provision of a clearly stated methodology, or how you propose to complete a project, is critical because it provides you with the chance to address how you will conduct the project. Now, the methodology section can provide a chance for you to clearly and concisely provide a plan about how you anticipate funds will be used over the course of your project, should it receive funding. You can utilize this section to provide support for your project's feasibility. A large segment of the methodology section should focus on providing information about the activities that you will conduct as a part of your project. By providing this information, as well as how such activities will be carried out, you're able to present funders with a type of plan of attack on how you expect to proceed. You can utilize this section to convince potential funders that you've been able to draft a plan that is both logical and feasible, and one that can ultimately lead to you successfully achieving required objectives. A sound methodology will include a description of the activities that you plan to conduct. In addition to presenting information about these activities, this section can prove to be important because it enables you to provide any justifications for why you need funding and why certain activities will be conducted. You can use this section to reveal what data will be captured, how the data will be captured, for instance, if you're using surveys or maybe interviews or focus groups, and how the data will be analyzed. Additionally, you can utilize this section to reveal those resources that you already have access to, resources that may be able to help you accomplish the established objectives. For instance, you can talk about the personnel who will be a part of the project. It could be, example, a statistician who you have on staff who will be able to help with analyses, or maybe you have access to a healthcare professional who will be able to help you collect biospecimen samples. You can also use the methodology section to also discuss any financial resources that you may have access to. By revealing these resources, whether financial or in the form of personnel who are already on board, you will have a greater likelihood of convincing a potential funder that you have the ability to not only successfully design a project, but to complete it as well. After you have utilized the goals and objectives sections to communicate what you hope to achieve, it may be helpful to also let potential funders know about available resources that you have access to, resources that can assist you successfully achieve any set objectives. One resource that you may have is your staff. If staff members will consist of individuals who are able to effectively complete each goal, make certain to include background information about these individuals, including any skills or expertise that they may bring to the table. For instance, if you are proposing the creation of a health education program, it may be useful to note that a staff member who will be working on the project is a health education specialist and that he or she has been working in this field for 15 years. By providing this information, you are conveying that, should you receive funding, the likelihood of you successfully and effectively achieving your objectives is great because you have access to an experienced team of individuals. You can include this information in the methodology section of the narrative. It may also be helpful to include CVs or bio sketches for each staff member for inclusion in the appendix section. Some funders require that you include a work plan as a part of the grant proposal submission. Although the creation of a work plan may seem intimidating at the outset of your writing process, if you are able to organize your writing plan and clearly think through the steps of your proposal, it will likely not be as difficult as you may have first believed. Before we set out to look at some examples of a work plan, let's first learn what this type of plan consists of. A work plan is an outline of a set of goals and processes by which a team and/or a person can accomplish those goals. It offers the reader a better understanding of the scope of the project while enabling the author of the work plan to better organize information. A key function of the work plan is to provide the writer of the proposal with the opportunity to break down the grant process into smaller, achievable tasks so that it is easier to digest information. It also helps to easily identify any goals that will be accomplished during the project. What are the elements of a work plan? A work plan consists of goals, objectives for each goal, activities for each objective, timelines, responsible parties, and deliverables. The work plan can be constructed in a number of ways. However you construct your work plan, make certain that it is easy to understand. It should contain a space for goals. You should then insert objectives under each designated goal. The objectives will be conducted in order to achieve each goal. For each objective, you then need to create a space for activities. These activities will need to be conducted in order to achieve each objective. In addition to spaces for goals, objectives, and activities, you will also need to include space for timelines, designated parties, or the individuals who will be held responsible for these activities, or at least held responsible for making sure that they're completed, deliverables, the data that will be collected, and any other information that you may want to include. So this slide features an example of a sample work plan. Note that the sample here provides a space for your main or overarching goal. Then there's a designated spot for measurable outcomes. You can then list within the table each of your major objectives. And then as you move to column 2, you will see the key tasks or activities that you need to complete each of those objectives. The person who will be held responsible for ensuring that the objective or the activities are completed. You can put just one person in this column, but as the activities are actually as they need to be completed. You can actually have a group of people work on completing them, but you can just list one person in the column who will kind of be held responsible. This person will kind of act as the point person, and they will be held responsible for making sure that the activities are completed. As you move down, the next column provides a space for the timeline, so you can put the start date of the key task and the activities, and then the anticipated end date. The next piece of the methodology section that we want to look at is evaluation. The evaluation process provides an opportunity for you to convey to a potential funder that the proposed project is clearly thought out and that the PI, or the principal investigator, is concerned that the stated goals have been achieved. A well-developed evaluation process can be helpful because it can help you to better create and articulate your project's objectives. So an evaluation plan can prove to be an integral part of a grant proposal. And although all proposals do not require that an evaluation plan be included, many funding opportunities do require that some type of evaluation plan, or at least some type of strategy, be provided as a part of the proposal. The evaluation plan can provide an important piece because it can help you show how you will demonstrate project progress, and it can help you to determine whether a project is ultimately successful. Once you know what objectives you wish to accomplish, determine what you need to do to achieve this. Develop an appropriate evaluation design for your project. Determine what activities you need to do and what information you need to capture in order to demonstrate that your goals and objectives have been met. As you develop this design, don't just think about what activities need to occur. Also think about your target audience or sample. Determine what group will be studied. Decide on the methodological approach you will use and decide what data you need, as well as what types of data collection instruments you will need to use in order to obtain this data. Collect and analyze the data, and then utilize your findings to determine if and to what extent you were able to accomplish any set objectives. Now, there are different types of evaluation that may be requested for inclusion in a grant proposal. A summative evaluation helps you prove that you've been able to achieve specific outcomes as you had intended, and a formative evaluation helps you determine if you're doing an evaluation to monitor if you're actually doing what you indicated you would do. A formative or process evaluation typically assesses initial and ongoing activities. And so this approach starts during the project development phase and continues during the actual implementation phase. It is useful in that it can help to provide new insight into ways that you can improve outcomes of proposed projects. The summative evaluation approach works to assess the success of a project's ability to actually reach specific goals. This evaluation approach presents information that was collected for activities and outcomes. It typically tends to occur after a project has wrapped up. Logic models are program planning tools that define and identify the inputs, outputs, and outcomes of a program. This tool helps to explain the logic or thinking behind how a program is designed. It can also illustrate how specific program activities lead to desired results. As you try to create a visual representation of your program or a logic model, consider the various elements of the project. What inputs will you put into the project? What outputs do you expect? What are the outcomes that will occur as a result of your efforts? So on this slide, we have an example of what a typical logic model might look like. You can note the boxes for inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And there's also a space for external influences and environmental or related programs. Now, note that you can illustrate your logic model in a variety of ways. This is just one example. There are numerous examples of effective ways to illustrate your project's progress. This is just one example of how you can illustrate the relationship between inputs or resources, project activities, outputs, and expected outcomes or effects. Inputs, outputs, and outcomes are three pieces of the logic model. Inputs are the resources, contributions, and investments that go into a program. Outputs should be regarded as the activities, services, events, and products that reach the program's primary audience. And outcomes are the results or changes related to the program's intervention that are experienced by the primary audience. Now, you may find that it's particularly useful to identify the inputs, outputs, and outcomes because they can tell you the resources that are required to successfully carry out your program, the composition of the target audience, and the primary goal of the program. So the next section that we want to look at that's included within the methodology piece of the project narrative is the budget or budget justification section. The section of the proposal that focuses on the budget should be used to state what your anticipated project costs will be. Often it may be easier to present your budget needs in an easy-to-read format, and so the use of spreadsheets or tables can prove to be very helpful when you're trying to accomplish this. Specific details about costs can be included in a narrative that is presented alongside the table or the spreadsheet. This narrative that you can use, sometimes called a budget justification, helps to explain the need for the included expenses in the project. Proposal guidelines may not always list the requirement to include this justification, but the inclusion of this explanation can prove to be very valuable because it helps to explicitly convey what your financial needs are and why those costs might be important for your project's successful completion. So as you set out to determine what your budget will be, determine what services, equipment, staff, and other services you will need. Make certain that you request what you need to accomplish the objectives that you have set forth in your proposal. You may also need to distinguish the budget categories that are listed. Items that are considered to be direct costs are those that are assigned directly to activities, while indirect costs are assigned to activities that may not always be able to be readily identified. Direct costs include the cost of personnel, costs like staff salaries and fringe benefits, and also included under this category of direct costs are costs for equipment, any needed materials or supplies, travel, and contracted services. Keep in mind that as you list certain items in your budget, you may want to include a budget justification to explain your need for any requested funds. You may want to include within the budget salaries for staff, including primary personnel and consultants. As you create your budget listing for salaries, this category can include the names and/or titles for all personnel who will be involved in the project. You may also find it useful to include the amount of time. This can be considered as the percentage of effort that each staff member will devote to the project. This information may also need to be included. So for instance, if a program coordinator is going to work full-time on a project, his or her effort on the project should be listed as 100%. However, if a statistician will work on the grant for 1/4 of the project, his or her effort may only need to be listed at 25%. Be certain that you make a point to address project needs that you may have so that you can request funding for them in your budget. If you decide that you want to interview a sample of individuals, for example, you must consider any costs associated with completing this process, and you want to make sure that you include all costs that are associated. So you want to include the cost for administering the survey, the cost of incentives for participants, the cost of compensating any staff who will work on the survey, the cost of equipment, as well as any other items that you might have to include. Another example might be if, for instance, funds are requested from the sponsor to cover travel costs associated with the proposed project. You might need to provide a breakdown of travel costs by trip, reflecting the purpose, the point of the travel, the number of persons, maybe the number of days, the airfare, lodging, and meal costs, any other costs like that. You may need to budget charges for computing services. If you need to include certain pieces of equipment, you may have to itemize by name and cost, as well as provide a justification for the need for this item. Make sure that you're aware of the funding agency's requirements as you set out to draft your budget. Certain agencies may have specific guidelines for certain costs. If an agency puts a limit on the cost of an international airline ticket, for instance, you may want to be sure not to exceed that cost in your budget. If your proposal travels that personnel have to travel internationally for some reason, maybe for a conference or a similar type of reason. As well, it's also important to note that if a funder will not cover certain items, including certain pieces of equipment, you may want to take note of that. If you find that this is the case, be certain not to include those types of items in your budget. Indirect costs include a number of other miscellaneous costs. These costs can include any general costs that are incurred during project activities. Costs for electricity, fiscal office costs for program or project management, or administrative costs are some examples. Some universities or academic settings may require that you add indirect costs, and this is called overhead, to a proposal's budget. If this is the case, be sure to find out what the standard rate is for overhead. Be sure to include a reference section so that you can list those references that were mentioned throughout the literature review and throughout other parts of the proposal. It may be helpful to provide supporting documents in an appendix section. You may wish to include tables, charts, figures, and other illustrations. You can also include other items like curricula, copies of your work plan, and logic model. You can also include CVs and bio sketches and any other documentation that you may think will help to strengthen your proposal and make your proposal a little bit more competitive. Once you have completed your entire draft, go back and create a table of contents. A table of contents will help to organize your proposal, especially if it is long and detailed. Depending on the funder, proposal guidelines may necessitate that a table of contents be included. So as we start to wrap up, be certain to keep in mind the following tips as you start your writing process. First, organize your notes so that your writing process will be easier. Next, familiarize yourself with the grant's requirements. Before starting the process of writing, make sure that you know what's expected. Create a checklist. Create a checklist of to-do items so that you won't forget any necessary tasks. Learn about your funders. Before you start writing, try to find out as much as you can about any potential funders. Find out about those issues that may be of interest to the funder. See if any of your interests actually match up with theirs so that you can craft a proposal that connects with the goals or missions of their organizations. Follow the funder's guidelines. Follow guidelines that provide information about the way that the proposal should be structured. Stick with any requirements regarding the proposal's format. You don't want to go through the time and effort of creating a proposal and have your proposal rejected because you did not abide by the stated formatting guidelines. Make sure that you pay attention to clarity and conciseness. After you learn about your funder, you can begin your writing process. Be sure to write with clarity and organize the sections of your proposal. If necessary, you can use headings and subheadings or more subheadings to structure your proposal. These headings can help to separate sections. You can also use bullet points so that the information is easy for the funder to read and review. Pay attention to limits. Pay attention to character, word, and spacing requirements. Make sure that you always stay within the limits. Be realistic. Make certain that you are realistic in what you think you can accomplish. Make sure that your proposal is realistic and that the outcomes that you are striving for are able to be achieved. Make connections. Be sure that your proposal is able to make clear connections between the research question that you pose and the objectives and goals that you set. Also, make sure that you're able to utilize the correct methods so that you can achieve the desired outcomes. Choose keywords carefully. Use vocabulary and keywords that are used by the potential funder when you're making these connections. Try to use the vocabulary that the funder uses. Proofread, then proofread again. This tip needs to be emphasized. Be sure to proofread your proposal before you submit it. Once you have reviewed it, proofread it again. Make certain that your proposal application does not have any errors. Look for grammar and spelling mistakes and make certain that you have all requested content. Check that you have followed all requirements, and this is including font, spacing, characters, or any other types of requirements. Make sure that you follow the guidelines exactly. Be sure that you select the most appropriate proofreader. So once you've proofread the proposal once, twice, or even 3 times, try to select someone else who can provide a fresh pair of eyes. When you give the final draft to someone who can proofread the document, try to make certain that the person has good attention to detail. This will assist with proofreading. Also make certain that this person is a good writer, that he or she possesses good grammar and spelling skills. It will also be helpful if this individual has no idea what your proposal is about. When the person reads the proposal, it will be important to see if he or she understands what you're trying to convey. He or she may be able to take note and determine if the explanation for the proposed grant is logically explained. If the individual does not understand, then it may be necessary for you to return to the drawing board and modify the content of the proposal. If there's an individual who's able to put a fresh set of eyes to the finished draft, it will be easier for him or her to quickly pick out any errors like grammar, formatting, or even spelling mistakes. Lastly, don't procrastinate. Make sure that you finish your proposal well before the deadline. Although some people may feel that they work well under pressure, if you wait and work too closely to the deadline, there is a greater likelihood that you will make mistakes or not have time to go back and proofread or have someone else proofread, or you may even experience unexpected technological errors, inputting information into websites or in different forms, or you may even miss deadlines. And the final tip is to compare your draft, the final draft that you have, the version, to the submission guidelines to make sure that you have stayed well within the requirements of the funder. So now that you've had an opportunity to learn a little bit more about the grant proposal writing process, let's take a little bit of time and work on a short assignment. Write a statement about a problem or an issue that you would like to address in the form of a grant proposal. As you write out the statement about the problem or an issue, also describe how you propose to solve this problem. Draft a project goal, and then also draft some project objectives. Include a few activities that you can use to address these objectives or accomplish these objectives. And then once you've described your objectives, take some time and use the SMART format to modify your objectives. I'll give you a few minutes to try and work on this. And then if we have time, if anyone is willing, we can share these with the group. Thanks to everyone for attending today. Now let's take a little time for some questions.